Kemal, could you please give us a little bit on Turkey, because Turkey is behaving a bit strangely lastly, strangely saying that Turkey is not following United States path. He is dealing with Iran, Iranian nuclear program in a different way, having problems with Israel. Is Turkey changing? Is Turkey shifting to an Islamist state, or what is it?
Well, I wasn't sure that that's the question you were going to ask me, but now I'm wearing my Turkish hat tonight, Thierry, and all of you, not my economist hat, I guess. But on Turkey, you know, one thing that struck me when I was reading Huntington's famous book, The Clash of Civilizations. I'm sure many of you have read it, probably many of you have forgotten it by now, which may not be such a bad thing. But he picks on, in that book, he actually picks on Turkey, if you remember, as the country that will be in the biggest trouble in the 21st century. He also cites Mexico and Australia. You know, Australia is in Asia, but not Asian. Mexico is Latin American, but very close and integrated with the US. But he says Turkey is in the worst possible situation because his famous kind of dividing line, civilizational clash line between the Muslim world and the West runs right inside Turkey, according to Huntington. Okay? And so he foresaw in that book big trouble in that sense. And I contrast it to the speech actually President Clinton made, US President Clinton made, when he came to Turkey.
Yeah.
And when he said, you know, Turkey actually is going to be doing very well in the 21st century because it has all these different dimensions. It has the European dimension, and that's deeply anchored in history, also into the Balkans and contacts with Europe. It has the Muslim dimension, obviously. It has a very strong Asian dimension from origins, and even the structure of the language, some of you may know, is related to Japanese and Korean. And I think some affinities with Mongolia, Mongolians and so on. So Turkey does have a lot of dimensions, a very strong Mediterranean personality also. And according to the speech that the US President Clinton made in Turkey, but these are actually sources of strength. And you know, contrasting these two views is in a way summarizes where we're at. I think if Turkey manages to integrate these dimensions, to be at peace with its various personalities, and in that way, it's a little bit also like Morocco. Morocco also, in an interesting way, you know, at the other side of the Mediterranean, has a little bit these various dimensions: African, European, Arab, Muslim, strong connections to France. You know, so in that sense, I find quite a lot of similarities actually between Turkey and Morocco. But I think the future of Turkey depends on Turkey's ability to thrive with this diversity, not to try to merge it, not to try to overcome it, but to actually make of this a strength. And if you believe that globalization is going to continue, and that global forces, economic forces, cultural forces are going to be very strong in the worldwide, I think taking advantage of these different dimensions is going to be a very good thing. Now, of course, it's not always easy. There are some real anxieties and tensions, and I think Turkey is going through these tensions. But I think so far it has done it peacefully, within the rule of law, within a basically democratic process. I myself am a member of the opposition party, have always been for decades. But I think both sides of Turkish society have played by the rule of law, and I think that's very important. And so I'm quite optimistic. On the economic side, it's an extremely dynamic...
Before going to the economics, is Turkey becoming Iran?
Sorry?
Is Turkey becoming another Iran?
No, not at all. and there's not the slightest chance of that. I think.
Why?
Well, the whole history of the, of even the Ottoman history is very different. It's a country that I think has been democratic with some weaknesses in democracy, but for 60 years. I think democracy is established now in Turkey. The citizens like it. They will not tolerate, I think, authoritarianism, And I also, I think Iran is also a great country with a great culture, with a great history, but it's democratic.
There are quite fears that Turkey is going more Islamic than before.
And so I think really it's very important that Turkey integrates all these dimensions, remains strongly European, remains a strong friend of the United States and member of the NATO alliance. Has always, this has been ever since the Second World War, part of Turkey's foreign policy and for Turkish identity. But it is a deeply Muslim country with very deep links to the Arab world, links that go back centuries. That when you hear the music, the food, the architecture, the mosques, there are clearly very deep links. And as I said, it has language links deep into Central Asia, into Asia. And I think all of this have to be elements of strength. But to be able to make these things elements of strength, I think you do need a strong economy. And I agree with you. You need to feed. And not only feed, you need to provide increasing prosperity to people. You need to provide employment. And I think if the economy is strong, these tensions will be managed. They will exist.
How is she doing now?
But I think it will be manageable. If the economy weakens, if there's lots of unemployment, if there's lots of economic distress, then managing these different trends is much more difficult. So I think the economic challenge is very, very important. And finally, I should also say, and this is, of course, I'm talking for myself. I'm not representing, the government or any other institution. But I do believe that the link to Europe also should remain very strong. I like to take Spain as an example. Spain is a country that is European, member of the European Union, fully engaged in Europe, but because it's Spanish-speaking, has a wide regional dimension, is very active in Latin America, in the Iberic world, has deep links with Mexico, with Cuba, with Argentina, with many Latin American countries. And I think the two things are not contradictory. So I believe Turkey can have very strong relations with the Arab world, can have very strong relations with the wider Muslim world, with countries like Indonesia, with Asia, with Africa. But at the same time, I do still believe that Turkey does belong in the European Union. I'm not giving up. It may sound very difficult
from the European perspective.
But I still believe that there is something there. That union, that framework, not for economic reasons, but more for the overall, political projection.
But do you believe, Kemal? Do you believe that Europeans will one day give up their this anti-Islam phobia? I mean, it's really strong, and the only thing which is against Turkey now, not the economy, nothing. It's because you are Islam. Islam is bad.
Well, there is that current in Europe. There is an anti-immigration, extreme rightist kind of current. But I wouldn't say it's the whole of Europe. I think many people in Europe are realizing that the European space has to include the Mediterranean, that the Mediterranean has a strongly Muslim part that has to be integrated. I think if Europe wants to thrive economically, it has to reach both east and south, towards Africa and towards the east. And I think, the Muslim populations are very dynamic, large parts of that picture. So I think many Europeans do realize that. And again, here, I think the economy is crucial. If there is sufficient employment and sufficient growth, it will be easier to integrate. Let me just end on one economic point. I really do believe that the story of the emerging markets is a deep structural shift in the world economy. The world will not go back to a rich world and a poor world division. I think the 21st century, when historians will write it in the 22nd century, will define it as the century where the world came together again economically, which it was 400, 500 years ago in terms of levels. It wasn't as integrated. But there was the difference between the richest country and the poorest countries before the Industrial Revolution in per capita income was 3 to 1. 10 years ago, the same data at the beginning of this century was 50 to 1 with the poorest.
Wow.
But I think this century will see it coming together. And so in that sense, we are going through a massive transformation. And the rich countries have to realize that they are losing the monopoly of richness. Okay? They may still be militarily very powerful. You know, the US military will still remain for decades, you know, much more powerful than anybody else. But in terms of economics, finance, trade, they're losing that monopoly. And that's a structural shift that will hopefully can be managed peacefully with, to make Thierry particularly happy, with good global governance. Because that's the whole point, to manage that shift with good governance.
Thank you. You're full of optimism, and I love